All right, so I'm gonna let Tom take it away.
Okay, thanks, Katrina.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I started looking into this topic in detail about a year ago in preparation for the new kiosk at Rojan Park at Dales Bridge in Germantown. So I've been working on the subject in detail for about a year and a quarter now. That kiosk is just about ready to go and should be up sometime this summer as part of a handful of improvements for that park. The picture here that I'm starting off with is of Elizaville Falls. That's right. There's a bridge where County Routes 19 and 2 and East Curly Corners Road come together. And I'm going to rapidly jump towards back to the river and then come back down the creek again. I'll start with, so these are our two best sources for Native American study of our local area here. The two sites that have been dug by professional archaeologists. The one on the left there is a publication from November 1976, and that documents the Ford site on today's Sunset Circle in the very northern end of Germantown. That dig was done in the late 1950s. Archaeologists by the name of Schaefer and Ritchie conducted that. They found many hearths, among other things. They found a lot of evidence that Indians were doing a lot of cooking of meat and fish that they would catch in the river and at the mouth of the Rojan. There's a tremendous amount of projectile points found on that site. And their interpretation was that that site was used heavily as a hunting and fishing camp as far back as the Lithic era, so into the 8 and 9,000 BC era. The majority of points that they found there came from the woodland period. It's a little bit closer to present day, about 3,000 BC or so to about 500 BC. But that is within the boundaries of Germantown itself. That's the most significant Native American site that's ever been professionally excavated. There is a house on that site now. During the construction of the garage for that house that was built later in the 70s or 80s, during excavation for the foundation of that garage, many more projectile points were found. But that was not a professional dig. The other professional excavation of a Native American site along the Rojan was during the development of the Iroquois Pipeline, and that's documented in the book on the right there. I have to look into maybe publishing excerpts of these because we have copies of these books at the history department, and a handful of people locally have these books, but otherwise this knowledge is kind of cloistered away and not well known to people. So the site where the Iroquois Pipeline crosses the Rojan is in the town of Claremont. It's a little bit upstream of the Bowery, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The village that they uncovered there, in addition to projectile points, they also found many, what they call them, middens, basically refuse pits. There were quite a few of those. So the archaeologists who uncovered that village interpreted that was more of a year-round settlement as opposed to just a seasonal fishing and hunting camp. These photos here, apologies for the difference in size, but on the left there is Robert Livingston, the elder, and his wife, Alida Schuyler Van Rensselaer Livingston. Her first husband was Nicholas Van Rensselaer, and after his death, married to Robert Livingston the Elder there. Robert Livingston the Elder is probably the most important player in Southern Columbia County history. This map here is the 1850 reprint of the 1798 John Wigram map. And up in the very top there, you can see Manor House built in 1699. And that also has the second Manor House, which was built in the early, or the late 1700s. So Robert Livingston the Elder purchases from the local Mohican Indians in 1683, purchases a few hundred acres right at the mouth of the Roeliff Jansen Kill there, and also purchases a couple hundred more out in the interior of Columbia County, referred to as Taconic. And several years later, he's granted a patent by the New York's royal governor for basically the entire third of today's Columbia County. Some 160,000 acres and change. And he builds his manor house right there at the mouth of the Rojan, pretty close, almost on the footprint of today's Roeliff Jansen Creek clubhouse. Within a few years of purchasing the land from the Mohicans and getting the royal patent for the land, initial patent for the land, he sold a pretty sizable chunk of this land to Dirk Wessel Tenbrook, who was at that time was mayor of Albany, New York. And the land included the very northern part. This is part of Germantown now, but it was not part of Germantown until 1858. This is all part of the Tenbrook purchase, this very northern tip of Claremont at the time and Germantown now. And Tenbrook's holdings were roughly 1,200 acres, and they went well into the interior. Included some of the town of Claremont and a little bit of what today is the town of Livingston. That I mentioned that earlier, that is the Bowery. That's built 1762 by Samuel Tenbrook, descendant of Dirk Wessel Tenbrook, who made the purchase from Robert Livingston the Elder. This is off Buckwheat Road in the town of Claremont, borders on the Rojan and stuff. Parts of that dwelling are a little bit older than 1762. There is another structure closer to the road, possibly. It's conjectured that it may have been a trading post that Dirk Wessel Tenbrook operated on the Rojan. There was, like I said, there was an Indian village just a little bit upstream of here. Whether it was an active Indian village at contact, unknown. But there certainly was at least a woodland era Indian village just a little bit upstream of here. And in that era, beaver pelts would have been what Tenbrook was mostly doing down here in this area. They're called the Bowery. It's the Dutch word for the farm. And he's buried here in the family cemetery, just up the hill from this house. Same map, the Wigram map. You can see the lower middle, you see Colonel Tenbrook. That's the Bowery represented on that map. Above there, you also see another Tenbrook. That's possibly the location of one of the older houses on the Bowery land. It's one theory. It's been thrown out there. It's a pretty old house. as well. The house just across the road Jan, from the Bowery there says General Livingston on it. There, this General Henry Livingston. That the house was built by Samuel Tenbrook in 1773, I believe. Sold or traded just a couple of years later to Henry Livingston. At that point, Samuel Tenbrook moves back over to the Bowery. And that house there, labeled General Livingston, is now today known as the Calendar House. And that's one shot of it. They're pretty similar in some respects. Interior chimneys, gambrel roof. And this building here, this is Tiviotdale. Now this is on Wire Road near the intersection with Dales Bridge Road. So quite a bit back from the road, you have to look for it, but there is a New York State historic sign for it. This picture is from the early 1900s. You can see what kind of condition it was in. This house was built by Walter Livingston, and in the early 1770s. And there was Walter expanded that a few times. Walter's economic fortunes kind of ebbed and flowed a few times in his life. So there were periods when he was flush with cash, and then there were some other periods where he was very desperately, in dire straits financially. Walter's daughter Harriet married Robert Fulton, who invented the Claremont steamboat, the first commercially successful steamboat. And they had 4 children. And Harriet was widowed pretty young. She was 30 years old when Robert Fulton died. Several years after he died, Harriet Livingston Fulton got remarried to a man named Charles Augustus Dale, an Englishman, and a bit of a dandy. And Charles Augustus Dale basically spent what was left of Harriet's inheritance from her father. And he basically renovated the house all over again to his liking, expanded it a little bit, bringing it to its modern configuration here. And then he decided to move back to England just with Harriet. He left all the 4 step-kids of his with Mary Livingston, who we refer to as Widow Mary Livingston in the history books. She lived at a mansion called The Hill, overlooking Bell's Pond. Survived into the early 1970s before being burned in a pretty obvious insurance fire. But so Dale took Harriet back to England, left her kids with Widow Mary, and Harriet died in England just a few years after they moved to England. And Charles Dale came back here to America, took everything he wanted out of Tiviotdale, and whatever he didn't want, he just drug out into the front yard and lit on fire. Is the story. And quite a few years later, decades even, Dale began courting a niece of the Widow Mary, who I mentioned that Harriet Fulton Dale's kids went to live with. And so a pretty young niece of Widow Mary, he began to court her. She's a Philadelphia area girl by the name of Margaret Greenleaf. She was something like 40 or 50 even years younger than Charles Dale. And her parents didn't want her to have anything to do with him. Apparently they got married in secret, and once the parents found out, they had Charles Dale arrested. And so the story goes, Charles Dale shot himself and killed himself in jail after being arrested. So yeah, and then Charles Augustus Dale, after all of that, he is the namesake of Dale's Bridge on the road jam, still to this day. And almost nobody knows. I know Alvin knows this story, but hardly anybody else really is aware of any of those details. And I think if they were, they'd probably pick a different name for the bridge. This house is called was called the Hermitage. This is built. The first wing of this was built or at least started in 1776. This was Peter Livingston's house. Most of the funding for the house came from his father. This was, kind of like a house for the ne'er-do-well son of the family. So plans were drawn up for the full house there that you see, but only one wing was finished at the time in 1776. In large part because war was on, and costs escalated very quickly, and that's a large part of the reason why it wasn't finished then. Centuries later, early 1900s, a lady named Ida Ogilvy, who was a famous geologist, got a hold of the original plans and finished the house according to the original plans, and rehabbed and preserved the original part that dated to 1776 as well. You can see there, Walt Miller, the former town, Germantown in Columbia County historian, got into the Hermitage property and took him probably 3 dozen pictures in 1940, late 1940. And we're very lucky to have those, because after Ida Ogilvy died, the Rockefeller family came into the ownership of this property. David Rockefeller and David Rockefeller, son of John D. Rockefeller Jr., and his wife Margaret, or Peggy Rockefeller, owned this place. And in 1982, Peggy Rockefeller decided she didn't want this house anymore, and decided to knock it down right as it was being prepared. I believe the story is it was a day before it was scheduled to go on the National Register of Historic Places. So that was a tremendous loss, but luckily for us, we do have 2 or 3 dozen photographs that Walt Miller took of the exterior and interior of the property, 40 years before it was knocked down. Peggy Rockefeller didn't stop at just knocking down the house. She also knocked down the historic sign. There were 2 historic signs for it by the road, and I believe they're in the Gibson archive. If you look through there, there's photographs of both of those signs knocked over and tractor marks in the dirt right next to the signs. And subsequent owners have not reestablished the sign there. The location, this was on Wire Road. There's a driveway somewhat opposite of Walker's Mills Road, if you're familiar with Wire Road. And way down that driveway, almost all the way into the road jam, is where the Hermitage stood. Now, I mentioned the Bowery earlier. In preparation for this, I was rereading a history that a gentleman named Thomas Hunt wrote of the town of Claremont. in 1928, I believe. He quoted a primary source saying that the Tenbrook family cemetery on the Bowery included the family, and then some distance to the north of that cemetery was the Tenbrook slave cemetery. And I bring that up because this was about 1998. At a house on Station Hill Road in the town of Livingston. They were getting ready to put an addition on the house, and the contractor dug a big hole in preparation for pouring a footing for a foundation. It rained really hard during the night after the hole was dug, and this rather large skeleton became obviously seen after the rain had washed some of the mud off. And there was something like 6 or 7, at least, skeletons unearthed in that hole. Alvin Sheffer was there, Mary Howell was there, people from State Museum were there, and it was determined that that one body there was an African American man, and in the memory of people who live nearby, living memory of people who live nearby, there was a gravestone up there that said Jim Jordan, free man of color, and there was a man named Jim Jordan who lived in the town of Livingston in the early 1800s, and you can find him on the census records for the town of Livingston. He lived over by Manorton somewhere. And so that's, likely one of these burials is him. This is very close to the location of the second manor house that was built in the late 1700s. Now, the Tenbrooks at the Bowery had a fair amount of slaves. 1790 census, Samuel Tenbrook has 11 slaves. And but on the old manor house properties in the 1790 census, there's 20, 30 something slaves between the various properties there on the hill. And so the question is, does that cemetery date to the times when there would have been quite a few slaves in the fields there on the Manor Hill, or is it a little bit later? And is that like a free black community that's buried there? And it's really hard to say with any certainty because the owner of this property declined to dig any further. Some of the archaeologists from the State Museum took, they took the skull there and some vertebrae and some other bones, back to their labs. But otherwise, the footing was put in there and the hole was backfilled, and that's all that ever came of that cemetery. Those bodies are still there, literally right next to the foundation wall of the addition on that house there. And talking to Mary Howell about this recently, she said that the day that was discovered was Helen Henderson's birthday. Helen Henderson was very involved in the history department and passed away in 2016 at the age of 105. And that's a couple photographs of her down in the trench looking at the skeletons. And Mary told me that Helen told her that was her favorite birthday of her whole life. There was down in the hole looking through the cemetery. Jump ahead a little bit in time here. This is a photograph. This is from a series of photographs of the fish hatchery on the Roeliff Jansen kill. This was established in the very early 1900s and operated for about 20 years, terminating in the late 1920s. And this is about where the Kleina kill dumps out into the Rojan. They would get fresh water from both the Kleina kill and the Rojan itself. And there was a series of ponds on the property. That was the main building of the New York State Fish Hatchery. And this was kind of in the relatively early days of state management of trout populations and bass populations. This was kind of like in the early days of that effort by the state. That's the interior of that building. And I'm hardly an expert on, what all the whole system in there, but that's a photograph of the interior of the hatchery. And then there's a long pond used to hatch the trout, and they would keep them in there until they were, a certain age, and then the fish from the site would be shipped out to various places in the district, in the region. Some would be put into the Rojan for fishermen in the Rojan, just like they are today. But many others would be put onto trucks and shipped all over the region. And that's a dam, man-made dam waterfall on the Kleina Kill, including a conduit there, concrete conduit there on the right along the bank there. And that was to funnel fresh water from the falls there up, or down into the ponds of the fish hatchery. Now this topic, I'm probably going to end up doing a whole other talk on Bingham's Mills, just because there's so much material. You might do a talk, might do a pamphlet length history, might do a book length history, just because there's so much going on at Bingham Mills here. On the Uyghur map I showed you earlier, if you look at that, it was called Good Hope Mills at the time. And that was the original mill. It was a grist mill originally. In the 1760s, the Livingston family basically went on a mill building spree in the aftermath of the French and Indian War. If you go around Columbia County, there's just a lot of the grand old houses date to the 1760s, and that's in part because a lot of the prominent local families made a fortune off that war, and also because they realized how vulnerable they were to attack. So they fortified their houses, they built their houses of stronger materials, and in this case, the Livingston family built mills on many of the local streams, including Good Hope Mills, which is the predecessor of Charles Bingham's mill. There were a handful of other millwrights between the Livingstons and Charles Bingham's time, including Jacob Plattner. I believe there's a Plattner on that map nearby there. That family is associated with this piece of land for quite a long time. Charles Bingham developed, I believe it was the early 1860s, developed, in addition to the grist mill there, he developed 2 paper mills on the site, and he made paper out of rye straw, which was a good business for him for a long time. Getting into the late 1880s or into the early 1890s, when other millwrights had developed a way to make paper with manila. That's basically what put rye straw paper mills out of business, and Charles Bingham sold out around that time And they still continued, operations there for a time, but it was much reduced. But in those 3 or 4 decades when Charles Bingham was there and this was going strong, this paper mill, there was about 20 houses in the immediate vicinity, roughly 125 residents in this small little village. There was, if you see there, really small print, it says Union Chapel. And that was a very small little church chapel shared by Methodist, Episcopal, Lutheran, and Reformed ministers who would come by and preach to people of those faiths in the village. Now this is after Bingham sells out, but before the power dam is built. A man named Alfred Wagner came in to own a large farm on the outskirts of Bingham Mills, and also owned the old Union Chapel. And fire went up. It caught on fire, burned down to the ground, January 22nd, 1898. And the person who was caught lighting it was a relatively young man named Walter T. Plass. And according to all the local residents, he was known to never have a nickel to his name. And the following day, he gave his wife a $5 bill. And when he was arrested, he basically said that this gentleman, Alfred Wagner, had put him up to it and gave him $5 to light the match that started this fire. Meanwhile, Wagner allegedly had doused the chapel with kerosene prior to Mr. Plass lighting it on fire. Now, both these guys went to trial for arson, and it was very big to do. It was got a lot of press, a lot of notoriety. The newspaper archive that New York State maintains, the Register Star, the last issue of it for some time, they talk about the verdict being expected that day, and then there's no edition for there's like a week-long gap in the newspaper records. So I don't know, without going through the court and going through the records, I don't know the outcome of that court case. I presume they were both convicted, but both of those names stick around. Maybe not necessarily directly descended from those gentlemen there, but Plass and Wagner are both names that stick around that area of Claremont and Livingston into the 20th century. And now in the years, there's about 2 decades, not even, between Charles Bingham selling out his interest at Bingham's Mills and moving away, and the Red Hook Power and Light Company developing a power dam at Bingham Mills. There were 3 guys who went into business for themselves, probably about 5 years or so before Red Hook Power and Light acquires that property. The Red Hook Power and Light acquires that property in 1907 and began a big long series of construction. That long structure there in the middle of this photograph, that was a wooden flume, very long wooden flume that carried water from the top of the falls way down and carried water down into and ran turbines. And this was a going concern before Red Hook Power and Light even bought out the 3 gentlemen who built that structure. this photograph here, you can see at least a couple of houses that aren't there anymore. Yeah, that's the Livingston side of the falls. The trees off to the left, that's the Claremont side. And in this photograph, you in the very, I don't know how well you can see, but way in the background of this photograph, upper right, you can see that wooden flume coming off the top of the falls, and that fed water into all of these. See all these chutes going down into these old structures, many of which are gone now, and you can also see the natural waterfall off to the right. Now, we've covered these couple stories. There was in 1912 was a rough year at Manor Mills. There was a man named John Hogan who was electrocuted. He was up on an I-beam inside the power plant and fell about 20 feet down. He was from Yonkers, and that just gives you an idea how far away guys would come to work at this place. The other pretty grisly accident didn't kill a guy, but leg got run over by a truck right at the site there. Henry Swartz. Now this story, got this off the Fulton history website. This is a Chatham Courier. There's no byline. Walt Miller wrote for the Chatham Courier, and this article at times reads a little bit like Walt Miller's writing, but most of it does not read like Walt's writing, but this is definitely Walt's beat. And this covers the downfall of Bingham Mills. And there was a bad flood in 1953. So that wooden flume that was built in the late 1890s or very early 1900s was still in operation in 1953 until there was a bad thunderstorm caused a flood, and about 100 feet of that wooden flume collapsed. And in the aftermath of that, Red Hook Power and Light decided that it's too expensive to rebuild that to any kind of more modern specifications. And at that point, they closed down operations shortly after. And they also lowered the level of the dam there. And doing so exposed some of the natural waterfalls that were not visible for about 50 years after they built their large dam complex. So you can see the ruins of now. That's the other thing too. I don't have a good picture of it in my collection, but that dam at Bingham Mills flooded a lot of the farm fields upstream of there. There's an orchard right nearby. Most of that was underwater in the power dam years, and on both sides of the creek, just upstream from the bridge. A couple of years after the power dam was completed, in 1914, the town of Claremont sued the Red Hook Power and Light Company because they kept the reservoir water level height. They accused them of keeping it too high, and in the wintertime, the reservoir would get too full, and the water would get up right into the undergirders of the bridge that was there at the time, and even over top it. And then when that would freeze, we would basically bust the bridge to smithereens. And within a few years, the town of Claremont had to spend money to build a new bridge there. And they sued, not sure successfully or not, but they did sue the Red Hook Power and Light Company. Another, I don't have a slide for it, but another pretty crazy story there involving a bridge was from 1884. There was wooden bridge back then at that site, and very derelict. It was known to be derelict for quite a long time. And for its last few years, it was restricted to only one person and one wagon on it at a time. And the gentleman went over it within his wagon with his team of horses, and apparently had too much weight on the wagon, and not the entire bridge, but the deck of the bridge collapsed, and he fell into the water, and the team of horses fell into the water. And he survived, but he was pretty badly injured, and from what I understand, the horses survived too. But there's a long history of bridge failure there at Manor Mills. This photograph, this is a big rock. This is down in this is in Livingston, not too far from Lithgow. Neither Germantown nor Livingston had any town parks of any kind until pretty recently, 1970s, 1980s. And before there was any parkland, kids would walk across farm fields and go to places like this, to swim, to hang out, to basically do what you would do in a park, And this was a very popular swimming hole in, especially in the first quarter of the 20th century and into the 50s and 60s as well. There's another shot of Big Rock. That story on the left is pretty rough one. So Memorial Day 1936, a 14-year-old boy named George Coon Jr. Drowned there at Big Rock, and this clip here is from a few weeks later, where his grandfather didn't take the boy's death very well, and they found him hanging from a rafter in his barn. He was 74 years old, David Coons. He lived out in Manorton, and both the boy and the grandfather buried out in Tacon area, Manorton area. And I haven't been to the cemetery, but I'm told that their gravestone is broken in half. So I may seek a grant in the next year or two to put a new gravestone up there. Yeah, this is like one of the worst stories. This probably won't make the cut for the kiosk. They don't like stories like this. But a couple other interesting things here. The grandfather, his name is Coons, and the grandson's name is Coon. And that gets back to a couple talks ago, I talked about Erastus Coons being responsible for the name change, adding the S to Coon. And this is just, further testament to the fact that not every branch of the family got on board with the name change. And then the other interesting thing here is the coroner of Germantown was a man named Jonas Potts. He was the noted butcher in town. He lived on Main Street in the house that was, until recently, the Attic Fox Funeral Home, and the small building close to the road on that property was his meat market. This photograph from the Gibson archive. It's a little tricky at the history department because we have some print offs of the Gibson photographs from 50, 75 years ago. So sometimes we have stuff that's scanned into our archive that is a Gibson photograph, but don't realize right at first. But this is a Howard Gibson photograph of kids swimming under the old Dales Bridge. You can see the historic sign there at the very top of the road above the abutment there. And this is a photograph. This is You can see the new Dales Bridge in the background of this photograph. This is a little bit newer era, probably 15, 20 years later. And you can sort of see, so the town of German, this was the town of Germantown swimming hole from approximately at least 1960 until Palatine Park was opened in the late 1970s. And what they would do here is every so often the town would go in and reestablish a rock retaining wall in a way there. That is basically like a safety net in case a kid, started floating away there. So this is all stuff you can't legally do to a creek now. Possibly not even then. But so the only outflow for the creek was all the way on the Livingston side there. It's just a relatively small little outflow there. And the town would bring in a lot of sand there to make the beach kind of nice there. This is now the Sportsman's Club. The Sportsman's Club leases this property from Germantown. Yeah. This photograph, this is the old Block Factory Road Bridge. This was replaced around 1940. The current bridge was put in over 9G. The other thing going on at this time was 9G was created starting in 1935 through Germantown. And it took a few years to finish it off completely with the bridge over the Rojan here, or not that bridge, but the new bridge being completed in 1940. Prior to that time, right down Lithgow Hill, there was no 9G. It was yet to take what's now Block Factory Road. So Block Factory Road is basically like a cutoff of the old road. Not all the cutoffs still exist. Block Factory Road is one of these ones that survived. But you can see the abutments for all of these abutments have held up pretty well for being abandoned for 80 years now. So the other thing about Block Factory Road, the namesake of that road is a block and tackle factory that dated to about 1820 or so. And we toss around ideas where it was located, but I'm of the opinion anyway, I could be wrong, that it was on the site of the old Manor Mills, which dated to the late 1690s or so. And the Manor Mills were part of Robert Livingston the Elder's complex there at the mouth of the Rogan. And that's what he used to feed the Palatines. And, they made bread at that mill. And around 1820, his descendants still owned it, and they converted that site to make block and tackle, which was in high demand at that time for use on ships. And, and in factories, budding factories. And then the other thing about this, one other thing about this immediate site here, from what I understand, one of the early town dumps was people would just go up to this general area and dump their trash right off the cliff down into the road. And the old, what's now old town dump on Round Top Road replaced that and other methods of disposing of your trash. So that old dump has, as leaky and as not environmentally conscious as that dump was, it was an improvement on what people were doing before, which was tossing their trash off the side of the cliff down into the road. That's a shot of the 9G bridge when it first opened. And the date I have on the photograph is 1940, which pretty much jives with the construction of 9G. This is a photograph Walt Miller took. I believe this is the bend in the Rojan just upstream from 9G. So we're right in the, we're like right in the area where that old Block Factory Road bridge was. And there's one of the abutments for the old Block Factory Road bridge. That'd be the Livingston side, Germantown side on the right here. That's another Walt Miller photograph. Another little bunny hole along the road that's completely gone now. This is Livingston Station. This is the namesake of Station Road in Livingston right here. This is, you see they had a massive complex here of warehouses, barns, and along to accompany the station here. Just a little, I won't cover it in this talk, but just a little bit north of here where the one of the big operations of the Burden Iron Works, massive kilns for smelting iron ore, and also massive trestle going out into the way out into the river. Railroad cars would bring the iron ore to a spot at the end of the trestle where they could dump the product into barges. All of it gone now. I won't cover it tonight, but and there's another shot. That's the station on the right, and the tower, and the water tower in the distance there. You see that shiny white rock surface there. That is like a natural rock wall that started to give way a couple of years ago, and the railroad had to spend a fortune, a small fortune, to shore up that wall and hold the land back from mudsliding down into the tracks. And that is Washburn's Dock. Very similar sort of operation as the Cheviot Steamboat Dock covered in previous talks. Warehouse at the end of it. And very shoddily constructed causeway out to the warehouse. The island, the end of the dock where the warehouse was, that island survives today. But everything else is pretty much gone. There are stories of people driving on that as recently as 1960s, 70s, somewhere in there. But I wouldn't try it now. And I'll end on that note. If you have any questions, you can start type them in the chat, or unmute yourself in a little bit and ask me the question. You can contact me at germantownhistory@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram at Germantown History. We're on Facebook as well, Germantown History Department. Our website is germantownnyhistory.org, and we also have a YouTube page, /Germantown History.
Thanks, Tom. So we have one question here. Is there more to that story? The home is obviously a source of trauma. Try to think about when that was.
Around the house.
House, probably the one that.
We're talking about the Hermitage,
Yeah.
the one that Peggy Rockefeller.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm curious.
Well, Alvin, I mean, I don't know how involved you were with historic preservation at the time, but I know it was a big controversy. There were a band of people who really wanted to save this property, and Peggy Rockefeller was equally determined to to knock that down and assert her property right to do so.
Yeah.
From what I understand, she hired contractors to knock it down, basically right, like they started at 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that.
Same place.
Yeah. And
But the problem is, there's a lot of similar stories and stuff. What happens is these groups wait, much too long.
until the last minute.
Like you said there, like the day before, one minute historic. Just, if these properties, were, identified earlier and stuff, possibly the Hermitage will still be there.
Yeah. I think that the Hermitage story really demonstrates the difference in mindset now. So I don't think a person of her station now would want that kind of bad press. Or, I think that there's the cultural attitudes towards preservation, historic preservation, it really changed drastically since the time. But yeah, that's just a hunch.
Yeah. Any other questions? Type them in the chat or unmute. We'll love to hear from you. It's quiet
Yeah,
night.
quiet crowd.
Well, you said the next talk you wanted to talk on, put me in there. I wrote it on my notepad.
And the next event coming up is the Palatines to America are doing annual meeting here at the library on June 4th. That's largely to showcase the Hank Jones collection that's upstairs here at the library. And we're also going to do a gravestone cleaning demonstration at Cheviot Cemetery. And we're going to do 2 or 3 stones that day. And then we hope to continue with the gravestone cleaning in the summer. And we're going to try and do the whole cemetery there in Cheviot this year.
So are you looking for volunteers? You looking for help?
Yeah,
If there's a way?
yeah. If you want to help out in June, July, I'll probably be doing a lot of gravestone cleaning. Yeah.
Sounds like a good time to do it.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of thank yous, and I'd be interested in hearing something about the Native American path along the road.
Yeah. So I mean, I briefly covered a little bit at the beginning. There have been a lot of what we call avocational archaeologists, people who just do it. They're not academics, they're just people who enjoy looking for artifacts. And there's been a lot of stuff found from all different eras around the mouth of the Rojan. All of it's private property now, but over the years, many artifacts have been found there by the mouth of the Rojan. The other site in Germantown proper that's somewhat related is a little bit off of Sharp's Landing Road. In 1990, yet another addition on a house. Some bone, a couple of leg bones, and I think a skull were unearthed, and they were determined to be a Native American teenage boy. And the forensics dated his body to somewhere between 1690 and 1790, which is kind of interesting because Robert Livingston the Elder had already purchased this land from the Mohicans in 1683, including what's now Germantown. So the earliest it can be would still be after Robert Livingston the Elder purchased the land, and that's the only other like legit, professionally done, peer-reviewed work on any Native American sites in Germantown proper.
Michael, I see you raised your hand. Did you want to add to that conversation, or did you have a question? You can unmute yourself. Well, can you say more about significant sites along the Rojan and Claremont?
Well, there's the one that was excavated extensively for the Iroquois Pipeline some 20-something years ago now. approximately where the power lines go over the roadjan, but the
It's probably best that the state
yeah.
isn't.
Well, I was gonna say the power lines kind of parallel the roadjan for a long stretch, so
You can do some detector work.
yeah,
Even I don't know exactly where
yeah,
Park and the RPO.
yeah. It's
Just as well.
Yeah. yeah. The only thing though, I will say, it was not too terribly far from the Bowery, because that's probably why Tenbrook wanted to build his house there, was because there's a village nearby that he could trade with. I would, be willing to bet on that. Further upstream, there's a lot. The Chicomico Creek is one of the major tributaries, if not the largest tributary of the Rojan. And there was the Moravian missionaries were, that's a long story. I can't cover it all tonight, but 1740s, 50s, into the 60s a little bit maybe. There were a Moravian mission on the Chicomico Creek, and that's in today's Pine Plains in Dutchess County. And that's the other like really big, significant Native American related site there along the road.
We had another question from Lois. Any interest in the water quality of the Rojan?
Yeah, so the one story I teased in the flyer for this was, I believe it was 1978, 79. Been having a hard time tracking down a newspaper article or any press on this, but there was a mishap of some kind at the Ankrum paper mill, which is Route 82 in Ankrum. The paper mill is still operational today. There was a mishap 78, 79, and the whole creek all the way down to the river was red for several days, if not weeks, that summer. And the one thing I do know that it affected Germantown was all the swimming lessons. The town had swimming lessons at the beach there at Dale's Bridge, and all the kids had to be bused to Hudson, to Oakdale Lake, that whole rest of that summer, because they were, even after the color had subsided from the creek, the state still didn't want people swimming in the creek the rest of that summer. So yeah, I don't know who paid for it, but basically the Columbia County provided transportation for the Germantown kids up to Hudson that whole summer.
Yeah, and Dave Mickey had shared a link and had mentioned Bard and Riverkeeper have data as well.
Yeah, they do a lot of great work.
So any other questions or feedback, information? Wait another minute or so, and then I'll let our guests go. We had a couple of guests arrive today for in-house, which is nice.
No, I live on 9G.
Okay.
My father originally bought the property in 41, it's probably right after 9G.
After the bridge, okay.
So I used to run and play in the woods, and there was a spot we used to go to, must have been like a dump for like, we'd find pieces of pottery, bottles, we always found Indian head arrows.
Yeah.
I found a wedding ring one time, long ring.
Wow.
Somewhere in the wood, we'd be running.
Oh.
It must have been in the 70s. I was back there, my mom and I were taking a walk through the woods and everything. And there was a man excavating, doing, whether he was professional or just a hobby, but this is some brickwork. And he was showing us nails, and he said they're probably from the 1700s.
Wow. Okay.
And that was all before houses were built back there.
Which side of the creek?
We're on the east side. So.
Oh, Livingston.
Oh, where the site was?
It's on the Livingston side or the Germantown side?
No, I'm.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is all this was on this.
Okay.
Both the.
It was probably out in Wanzer. because he was an avocational archaeologist, very, knowledgeable about pottery and stuff.
Yeah.
And he told me stories up in the back of the boat club where he found umpteen, hatchet heads, asses and all kinds of stuff. And I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant piece of land, that entire mouth of the Rojan, for both Native American history and also Palatine era, Robert Livingston era. You really don't have to look far for artifacts anywhere.
You mentioned the funk side on it.
Yeah.
And that's on the Germantown side, and we're talking on the other side, so if you
Yeah.
find all of that on the one side, stands to reason there's, as much or maybe more on that hasn't been.
Oh yeah.
They did some archaeology when they were gonna split that up, they hired, the bar archaeologists.
Yeah.
They did some shovel tests, I'm pretty sure they found some significant things there. Just north of the boat.
Okay.
Michael, I saw you had your hand raised again. Did you have a?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
I was trying to activate the microphone and I had to get out of the app, then come back into it. So my apologies. My question is, I heard a rumor that the source of the Rojan was as mysterious as the source of the Nile. But a rumor has it that it gets its start in Copiague. Is that correct?
And I believe the headwaters of the Rojan are in Austerlitz.
Austerlitz. Okay.
It runs under Route 22, a little bit south of Hillsdale. It also runs, there's a road off of 22 up there in Austerlitz. I can't think of the name of it now, but up in Edna, St. Vincent Malay country, there's a side road that goes over.
Steeple top.
Yeah, not too god awful far from there. There's a side road that goes over it. And the headwaters are, I've never followed it all the way, but it's somewhere up there. The big tributaries are the Bashfish Creek, comes into it, and also the Chicomico Creek. Those are both very sizable tributaries, as well as the Kleinick Hill and some others.
And then it dips down way into Dutchess County and then comes back up. Is that correct?
Yeah, it makes kind of looks like a fish hook or a J. Starts way up in Austerlitz, all the way down through Copiague, Ancram, Gallatin, and then down through tiny little slice of Pine Plains, Milan, and then Jackson Corners.
Is it on that map? One of your first maps?
I don't have unfortunately I didn't bring it. I didn't bring a good map of the whole thing because it's so big, and in this format I kind of have to.
Is it on Parsonage? Yeah.
I believe Rojan Watershed Community has a pretty good map on their website of the course of the Rojan. That's probably your best bet. But yeah, it does make it basically a J shape through Columbia County and a little bit of the Dutchess.
And did you say anything about the name Roeliff Jansen, how it got its name?
No, actually, I didn't cover that. Sorry. Thank
Good
you.
question, Michael.
Might have been.
Roeliff Jansen. So it's a little bit disputed, the identity of him. The traditional account is that he was a native of Marstrand, island of Marstrand. At the time was under Norway's thumb, but it's now part of Sweden, I believe. He was an early settler in the Rensselaer, Van Rensselaer patent to the north of here. And one of the stories is that he got stuck in the ice on his way down to New York City, got stuck in the ice near the mouth of the Roeliff Jansen Creek, and got stuck there for a while, had to spend a few days stuck. And so that's the traditional story, but the there is another account. There were multiple men by the name of Roeliff Jansen or something close to that. There were multiple men with that name in New Amsterdam at that time in the 1630s, 40s. And modern scholars aren't so sure about the old story. And I tend to encourage people to be careful about the old stories about Roeliff Jansen, because I really don't know. But I do like having his name. I'm not so crazy about Dale having Charles Augustus Dale having a bridge named after him.
Right.
But,
All right, thank you.
yeah, of course. Thank you.
Oh, so Dave McGee had posted in there, you want to reach out to him. He created a drive along the road jam, turn by turn directions. That's great.
Awesome.
And then the June 4th event, is that open to the public?
Yeah, it's open to the public. It's free. We're asking for a suggested donation of $20 to offset some of the expenses. And I'll be doing a talk there about the Cheviot Cemetery and the First Reformed and the First Lutheran cemeteries, which are lost now. Probably won't be there quite by that time, but we are putting up a monument at the First Reformed Cemetery this summer, probably sometime in July. Outside chance it might be up by June 4th, but I think we're looking sometime in July. So it won't be as lost of a cemetery by midsummer this year.
That's great. Well, we thank everybody so much. We look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great night.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.